They were broke, desperate, and just one decision away from giving up forever. But on a cold October night in 2007, three young guys inflated a couple of cheap air mattresses on the floor of their tiny San Francisco apartment. And without knowing it, they launched what would one day become a $100 billion empire. This is the unbelievable, almost impossible, nearly failed journey of Airbnb, the startup that rewrote the rules of travel, survived a global pandemic, and changed how millions of people see the world. Most billion-dollar companies begin with millions in investment, fancy offices, or elite Silicon Valley backing. But Airbnb started with nothing more than a rent problem. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were two struggling designers who had just moved to San Francisco chasing big dreams. But there was one problem. They didn't have enough money to pay their rent for the next month. Their bank accounts were nearly empty, and both of them were too embarrassed to ask their parents for help. As Brian later said, "We weren't just broke, we were broken." And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, they heard surprising news. All the hotels in San Francisco were fully booked because a huge design conference was coming to town. That's when Joe had a crazy idea. The kind of idea that sounds ridiculous at first, but becomes revolutionary later. He said, "What if we just rent out our place?" Brian thought Joe had lost his mind. Their apartment was tiny, messy, and had no real beds. But Joe clarified, not the whole place, just the floor. We could buy some air mattresses and host people like a small bed and breakfast. A bed and breakfast, but with air beds. A bed and air breakfast. An air, bed and air breakfast. They laughed at the name at first. It sounded like a joke. But they had no other choice, so in desperation, they bought 3 air mattresses, took a few photos, built a very basic website, and waited. And to their complete shock, within days, 3 strangers booked their living room for $80 a night. These were their first guests. And when those guests arrived, a 35-year-old woman from Boston, a man from India, and a father coming to the conference, something incredible happened. They ate breakfast together, shared stories, and connected like old friends. Brian and Joe realized they weren't selling a space. They were selling belonging. That night, the spark for Airbnb was born, not from money, but from pure survival. But great ideas don't automatically turn into great companies. Over the next year, Brian and Joe tried everything to keep the idea alive. They recruited their old roommate, Nathan Bletcherchick, a computer genius who could build the platform. They brainstormed hundreds of features, redesigned the website, and tried to convince people that letting strangers into your home wasn't crazy. But no one believed them. When they pitched investors, they were rejected over and over. One investor said, "People will never trust strangers." Another said, "This idea is dangerous." Another literally laughed at them. In fact, they pitched 15 investors in Silicon Valley, and all 15 rejected them. They were running out of money again. They had credit card debt. Their families were worried. Their laptops were breaking. They were weeks away from shutting down the company. They even considered giving up entirely. But instead of quitting, they did something extraordinary, something that has now become startup legend. During the 2008 U.S. presidential election, they came up with a creative fundraising idea: selling limited edition breakfast cereal. They designed boxes of Obama O's and Captain McCain's, 2 parody cereals with political themes. They printed the boxes themselves, glued them by hand, and sold each box for $40. It sounded insane, but people bought them. A lot of people bought them. They made $30,000 from cereal. That money kept Airbnb alive. The cereal stunt became their first real sign of a defining trait. These founders refused to die. But even with new hope,
Airbnb was still struggling. Their website wasn't gaining traction, hosts weren't signing up, guests weren't booking. The idea needed something more. And that something arrived when they applied for Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in the world. They expected to be rejected like before, but instead they met Paul Graham, the co-founder of YC. At first, he wasn't impressed. He didn't understand why people would stay in strangers' homes. But when he heard about the serial hustle, everything changed. He saw grit, real grit. He told them, if you can convince people to buy $40 cereal boxes, you can definitely get people to use your website. That single sentence changed their lives. They joined YC's Winter 2009 batch, and everything accelerated. Paul Graham gave them a brutally simple piece of advice. Your users are in New York. Go to New York. At the time, Airbnb was based in San Francisco, far away from their target users. But they listened. They flew to New York, met hosts face-to-face, took professional photos of listings, helped users write descriptions, talked to guests, fixed bugs on the spot. Basically, they did things that did not scale. Slowly, listings improved. Hosts gained trust. Guests started booking. For the first time, Airbnb felt real. By the end of the YC batch, the company was finally growing. Investors who once rejected them now wanted to meet them. Their website traffic rose, hosts were joining daily, and the founders realized that the key to Airbnb wasn't the room, it was the connection. People didn't just want a cheap place to stay, they wanted an experience, a home, a story. Hotels couldn't offer that. As the company grew, they faced new challenges: trust, safety, scaling, regulations, and competition. But the founders kept evolving. They introduced verified IDs, a secure payment system, host guarantees, damage protection, and community guidelines. Every decision was built around one philosophy: strangers don't have to stay strangers. By 2011, Airbnb was in 89 countries. By 2012, they hit 1 million nights booked. By 2013, they were valued at $10 billion, more than Hyatt hotels. Investors who rejected them were now stunned. But in 2014, something even bigger happened. They launched a new brand identity, the now famous Bello logo, representing Belong Anywhere. This was more than branding. It was a global movement. Airbnb was no longer just a website. It was a community of millions. Then came the years of hypergrowth. Cities around the world filled with Airbnb apartments. Travelers preferred homes over hotels. Families traveled cheaper. Solo travelers found community. Hosts turned spare rooms into income. Entrepreneurs built entire businesses around Airbnb rentals. It was explosive. But success does not protect you from disaster. In 2020, the world shut down. Travel collapsed. Borders closed. Bookings fell by 80%. The company lost billions in weeks. Airbnb laid off 25% of its employees. Brian Chesky later said, "It felt like running a car at 100 miles per hour and then the engine blow up." Airbnb was on the brink of death again. But just like before, the founders didn't give up. They made painful decisions. They cut costs. They redefined the company. They shifted focus from growth at all costs to going back to our roots. They supported hosts with emergency funds. They built new trust features. And slowly, as the world reopened, something unexpected happened. Travelers preferred homes over hotels even more than before. Airbnb became the symbol of safe, private travel. And then came the moment no one expected. Airbnb went public. On December 10, 2020, Airbnb launched its IPO, one of the biggest IPOs in history. Its market value hit $100 billion on the first day. 3 guys who once slept on the floor literally created a global travel empire. But this story isn't just about business. It's about belief, determination, creativity, resilience. It's about saying yes when the world says no. It's about being so broke that you sell cereal boxes and so ambitious that you build a global community. Airbnb became more than a company. It became a symbol of modern entrepreneurship, proof that you don't need money to start. You just need a problem worth solving and the courage to believe you can solve it. Today, Airbnb has hosted over 1.5 billion guests in more than 220 countries. From tiny homes to castles, from beach huts to mountain cabins, it has turned the entire world into one giant neighborhood. And even after all the failures, the rejections, the crises, and the near-death moments, Brian Chesky still describes Airbnb in one sentence. We started out solving our own problem.